It was a mild Saturday afternoon in early autumn, the kind of afternoon many of us remember from years ago. The sun hung low, warm but gentle. Leaves drifted down in slow spirals. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, and a child laughed. Margaret Caldwell sat on a wooden bench in the park, her posture straight out of habit more than comfort. At 56, she had built a life that looked impressive on paper. She was the CEO of a thriving logistics company in Chicago. Her calendar was always full, her phone rarely silent, but on this afternoon, her phone was tucked away in her purse. Beside her stood her son, Owen. Owen was 8 years old. He had soft brown hair that fell across his forehead and wide gray eyes that seemed to take in the world in careful silence. He wore a pale blue t-shirt and jeans slightly too long at the ankles. His small hands rested at his sides. Owen did not speak. Doctors had called it selective mutism at first. Then they used other terms. Margaret had listened to all of them. She had nodded. She had written checks. She had rearranged her schedule. But the silence remained. She watched the other children race across the grass. Their sneakers kicked up dust. Their voices rose and fell like birdsong. Owen watched too, quietly. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. There had been a time, long before boardrooms and quarterly reports, when she had imagined motherhood differently. She had pictured bedtime stories read aloud, questions asked at the dinner table, the ordinary noise of family life. Instead, she had learned to treasure small things, a squeeze of her hand, a fleeting smile, the way Owen leaned into her shoulder when he was tired. Still, there were days when the silence felt heavy. "Go on, sweetheart," she said softly. "You can play." Owen did not move. Across the lawn, a man knelt beside a little boy who looked to be about 4. The boy had sandy blonde hair and a bright grin. He was holding a red toy truck with one wheel missing. The man, perhaps mid-30s, wore a navy polo shirt and faded jeans. His build was sturdy, the kind that came from lifting more than paperwork. He adjusted the truck carefully, speaking to the child at eye level. "That's okay, buddy," he said with easy warmth. "We'll make it work. Sometimes things don't need to be perfect to keep rolling." The boy giggled. Margaret found herself watching them longer than she meant to. The man's name was Daniel Harper. He was 38, a widower, a single father to little Luke. Margaret didn't know any of that yet. She only saw the way Daniel listened to his son, fully, as though nothing else in the world demanded his attention. Luke noticed Owen first. Children often do. He wandered over, clutching his imperfect truck. He stopped a few feet from Owen and held it out. "Want to help me?" he asked. Owen looked at the truck, then at Luke. He didn't answer. Margaret felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the anticipation of awkwardness, the apology she might need to offer. But before she could rise, Daniel had joined them. He crouched down so he was level with both boys. He smiled, not the polite kind reserved for strangers, but the easy, unhurried kind. "Hi there," he said gently to Owen. "I'm Daniel. This is Luke. We're experts at fixing things that are a little broken." His tone held no pressure, no expectation. Owen's fingers twitched slightly. Daniel glanced at the truck. "You see this wheel? It fell off this morning. Luke was pretty upset about it." Luke nodded solemnly. "But then we remembered something," Daniel continued. "Sometimes you can build something new from what's left." He placed the truck on the grass between them. "Would you like to hold it?" he asked Owen quietly. Margaret held her breath. Owen hesitated. Then, slowly, he reached out, his small fingers wrapped around the truck's body. Luke beamed as though he'd just made a lifelong friend. Daniel stayed where he was, patient as stone, warmed by sun. "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said, almost as if he sensed what Margaret had been carrying for years. "We can just sit." And so they did, the 4 of them, 2 adults, 2 boys, a broken toy truck. A breeze rustled the trees above. After a few minutes, Luke began pushing the truck gently along the grass, guiding Owen's hands with quiet enthusiasm. Owen didn't pull away, he didn't speak. But he stayed. Margaret felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not hope exactly, something steadier than that. Relief. Daniel eventually stood and walked over to the bench. He kept a respectful distance. "They seem to be doing fine," he said. Margaret nodded. "My son doesn't usually join in." "He doesn't have to," Daniel replied simply. She studied him more closely now. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes. Not from stress, she realized, but from smiling often. "He doesn't talk," she said after a moment. The words came out flat, practiced. Daniel nodded once. "Luke didn't talk much after his mom passed," he said quietly. "Grief can make the world feel loud, so kids go quiet." Margaret turned toward him fully. "I'm sorry," she said. "Me too," he answered. "But silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's just waiting." They sat in companionable quiet. Margaret found herself speaking more than she had planned. About therapy appointments. About teachers who meant well. About the way she sometimes wondered if she had spent too many years building a company and not enough simply sitting on the floor with her child. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. When she finished, he said gently, "You're here now." The words landed softly, but deeply. Across the grass, Luke laughed as the truck tipped over. Owen bent down to set it upright again. Daniel smiled at the sight. "You know," he said, "Luke's truck may never look the way it did before, but he loves it more now because we fixed it together." Margaret swallowed. Owen glanced up at her then. Their eyes met, and for the briefest second, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. The kind of smile that mothers carry with them for decades. The afternoon stretched on in easy rhythms. The boys wandered toward the swings. Daniel walked beside them. Margaret followed. Owen did not speak that day. He did not need to. Before they left, Luke tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can he come back?" Daniel looked at Margaret. "If you'd like," he said. Margaret felt something inside her, something tight and guarded. "Loosen." "Yes," she said. "We'd like that." As they walked to their car, Owen slipped his hand into hers. Halfway across the parking lot, he stopped. He turned back toward the playground where Luke was waving wildly. Owen lifted his free hand, a small wave. Then, barely audible, a whisper. "Bye." Margaret froze. She knelt down slowly. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice trembling. Owen looked at her, uncertain but steady. "Bye," he repeated. One word, soft as a falling leaf. But to Margaret, it sounded like a symphony. She did not cry there in the parking lot. She simply held him. Because at her age, she had learned something important. Miracles are rarely loud. They arrive quietly, like a man kneeling in the grass with a broken toy truck. In the weeks that followed, Saturdays at the park became routine. Margaret began leaving her phone in the car. Daniel brought extra snacks. The boys built small worlds in the sandbox. Owen's words came slowly, but they came. And Margaret found herself remembering her own childhood. Summers that seemed endless, parents who measured wealth not in money but in time. She had built a company worth millions, but what changed everything was a single afternoon spent sitting in silence. Years later, when Owen was taller than she was, Margaret would still think about that day, about how kindness doesn't demand attention, it simply shows up and waits. And in the waiting, something beautiful begins.